Well, hi, everybody. It is week 5 in our poetry workshop online. And I just wanted to supplement the readings this week with my little lecture on free verse and given forms. So as I said in my written lecture, we've been looking at mostly free verse so far in most all of the poems we've been discussing in the threads, and the Fraser and Davidson book suggests that it's fruitful to allow form to arise organically from free writes and from reading and writing and continuing to list our images and delve into our subject matter. But, you know, that's not for everyone. Sometimes it's very helpful to have a given form and to take that form and apply your own content and material to that form and maybe bend the form once you understand the form. So anyway, we'll be looking at some formal metered verse this week, a variety of it. And in order to start us out, I wanted to just read a little bit from, if you're very interested in formal metered verse and that's your thing, which is great, I celebrate that. Here's a book you need, The Making of a Poem, a Norton Anthology of Poetic Forms. And this is a great book. Evan Boland and Mark Strand are the editors. The Making of a Poem, a Norton Anthology of Poetic Forms. And in this book, you have section, the villanelle, starts the villanelle at a glance. It gives you 6 elements of the villanelle, poem of 19 lines, 5 stanzas, each 3 lines, with a final one of 4 lines, etc. It has the history of the form, and then the contemporary context for the form, and then it will give you several villanelles that start way back and go up to the present day. But I wanted to read a little bit about the history of the form of the villanelle, since we will be looking at the Thomas Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night again this week. So the history of the form, this is for the villanelle. It hardly seems likely that a form so sparkling and complicated as the villanelle could have had its origin in an Italian harvest field. In fact, it came from an Italian rustic song. The term itself, villanella, thought to derive from villano, an Italian word for peasant, or even villa, the Latin word for country house or farm. If it was a round song, something sung with repetitive words and refrains, it may have taken its first long-lost shape as an accompaniment to the different stages of an agricultural task. Binding sheaves, perhaps, or even scything. No actual trace of this early origin remains. By the time the villanelle emerges into poetic history, it does so as a French poem with pastoral themes. The form we know today began with the work of a French poet called Jean Pazerat. He was a popular, politically engaged writer in 16th century France. When he died in 1602, he left behind him several poems that had entered popular affection and memory. One of these was his villanelle about a lost turtle dove, a disguised love song. And I will spare you my horrible French and go on to say, with the publication of this villanelle, and because of its immediate popularity, amounting almost to popular song status in its day, remember this is the late 1500s, the form defined itself through contact with an audience, a striking but not uncommon way for a poetic form to find itself. This poem established a pattern for all future villanelles, both in French and English, and then they explain the form, again, of the villanelle. And then later, in the 1870s in England, French poetry became an object of interest and admiration. Swinburne, for instance, wrote an elegy for Baudelaire. This was followed by an interest in the forms of French verse, and several poets of the time, including Henley and Oscar Wilde, took it up. Oscar Wilde wrote a villanelle in 1891, and although stiff and ornamental, it shows the form ready to be launched into the 20th century. Okay, so that is one of the given forms, the villanelle. Origin in the Italian harvest field. We've had all sorts of different forms that have come up in our discussion threads, which has been really cool. One of the ones that I was thinking of talking about that I didn't write about is the haibun, Haibun. So this is literary form originating in Japan, which combines both prose and haiku. The range is broad and frequently includes autobiography, diary, essay, prose poem, short story, and travel journal. And I had never heard of the haibun until I saw my friend Sean Hill's book, which is entitled Blood Ties and Brown Liquor, and it's set in his hometown of Milledgeville, Georgia. And so I thought I'd just read this Milledgeville haibun. If you want to read along, you can Google Sean Hill Milledgeville haibun, or just Sean Hill haibun, Haibun, and it'll come up. So this is his prose, followed by a haiku. Beat, beat, beats beat here. The sound of the train on the Georgia road, the measured claps of the wheels at the gaps of the joints of the rails, is the beat of the hammer on iron and anvil at the smithy, soul's shop, shaping shoes for mules and horses, and the sizzle of red metal and water is the train's whistle, and all echoes resound and effuse. The last word returns like watermelons here with summer heat. Beat with a hammer, beat when he, a boy, broke into the garden at the county jail at night when the beat men were asleep because theirs were the sweetest, so bust one open, the dull thud just before the crack, and eat the heart and move on to the next. And he moved on to women and settled eventually on one and finally busted her with finality, thud before crack. And he measured time, raising the sweetest watermelons for a time, and time served, he returned a man, and he lay on the tracks of the Georgia road, cradled by the rails, heart stopped. Old railroad abandoned. Between cross ties, trees grow. A feral pig roots below branches. That is Milledgeville haibun by Sean Hill, who now lives in Fairbanks, Alaska, and is a very brave and wonderful poet. And in my written lecture, I mentioned my colleague Barbara Nickel, who's a Canadian poet and a violinist. And I thought I'd just read one sestina to you from, this is her wonderful book called Domain. Isn't it cool? It just looks so cool. Domain, Barbara Nickel. And there's her very serious poet photograph. But this is a poem called Sestina for the sweater. And Ashley's hat poem kind of reminded me of it. But listen for the repetitions. The sestina is, again, a form that uses the same word at the ends of lines and rotates through. They're really fun to try if you want to try a sestina. You can look it up. But this is Barbara Nickel's Sestina for the Sweater. One sleeve left. The rest has taken 16 years, begun in college for the boy who played the violin. I was so young, just learning to cast on, cast off, purl two, knit one. I'd lose stitches alone in the pew while he filled the dark church with Sibelius. By 3 a.m., needles forgotten, wool tangled on the floor, I'd knead his shoulder for the secret of his gift. In a year or two, I thought we'd marry. But I wanted to fill the sweater with another shape, and played with his tears in wool on wood. I chose another I knew I'd lose, even while he held out his hand, sun casting brilliant shapes down the grave we leaned against. I cast off gilt and stitches, a new armhole, needles of pine, King Lear, warm beer, his loose way of walking I'd follow in and out of years, and off and on, gaps alone, when I'd knit a ply of my hair into the cuff. When I filled my bag and left the last time, grief filled up my elbows and knees, I broke my wrist. The cast kept me from knitting and playing the violin. Too many mistakes. I stuck my needles in a bag, safety pinned the sweater from unraveling. That year I found another I could never lose, except we kept saying goodbye. But loss I could count in days by rows, measuring when the next we'd fill a week or two with love and edgy sports. In the years to come I'd stitch shoulder to neck the cast of our future green with the need for acreages and children. The sweater matched his eyes. I played at this, outgrew it. One sleeve left, Sibelius playing on the radio. I drive through rain, count the lost strands of their lives, what it would take for my needles to knit it whole, and for whom? Not my husband, he'll fill my life. Besides, it wouldn't fit. But to recast myself into the sweater done, wool finally touching skin. Years later, one tries it on, plays with a cuff, finds my hair, refills his coffee, feels the loss, casts me off, casts me on. sound of needles as we face the years. So that is a Sestina by Barbara Nickel. I hope you enjoyed it. Hear the repetition. And Jimmy really liked it. Didn't you, honey? Ew, that's gross. Sorry. He's got a very long tongue. All right. See you soon.